You kneel in a room the size of 2 tatami mats. Even the ruler of Japan bows to enter it. One day, he will order its builder to die. You know this feeling? The relief of finally being allowed to become small. If you know that feeling, you are in exactly the right place. I am a native Japanese creator, and this is Japan for Sleep. Before we begin, please subscribe to our Quiet Nights, leave a gentle like, and tell me in the comments where you are resting tonight. Now get comfortable and let the story carry you. That room belongs to Sen no Rikyu. This is his story. The city of Sakai in the year 1522 was unlike almost anywhere else in Japan. The country was at war. It had been at war for decades, the old central authority in Kyoto having collapsed into a century of feudal conflict that historians would later call the Sengoku period, the age of warring states. Across Japan, lords fought lords for land, for survival, for the chance to be the one who would finally bring the whole nation under a single hand. Armies moved, castles fell, alliances formed and dissolved in a single season. It was an age of overwhelming, beautiful, exhausting ambition. Sakai did not belong to any of this, not entirely. Sakai was a port city, and it had grown rich on trade, with China, with the kingdoms of Southeast Asia, with the Portuguese, who arrived in the middle of that century and brought firearms and Christianity and an astonishing hunger for Japanese silk and lacquerware. The merchants of Sakai had used their wealth to purchase something rarer than gold in the Japan of that time, a degree of self-governance. The city was administered by its own council of merchant elders, not by a feudal lord with a sword. It was an island of commerce and culture in a sea of war, closer, in spirit, to the merchant republics of Renaissance Italy than to the castle towns of the Japanese interior. Into this city, in that year 1522, Sen no Rikyu was born. His given name was Yoshiro. His father, Tanaka Yohei, ran warehouses and was a fish wholesaler of substantial local standing. They were not samurai. In the rigid social hierarchy of the time, merchants occupied an awkward position, often wealthier than the warriors above them, but ranked below samurai, below farmers, below craftsmen. Their money was real. Their status was not. And yet the merchants of Sakai had done something remarkable with their money. They had fallen in love with tea. Not tea as a casual pleasure. Tea as a discipline, a pursuit, an art form that consumed a lifetime and rewarded the most rigorous attention. The wealthy traders of Sakai studied with the great tea masters of the age, built rooms specifically for tea, collected utensils with the same fervor with which they pursued profit. In Sakai, the tea ceremony was the highest expression of what a cultured man could be. Yoshiro grew up inside all of this. He began studying tea in his teens, first under a local master named Kitamuki Dochin, then, around the age of 19, under a man named Takeno Ju. And Ju was the teacher who changed everything. Ju was himself a merchant, and he had developed a way of thinking about tea that moved away from the formal appreciation of famous Chinese art objects, the kind of tea that announced wealth and breeding, towards something quieter and more demanding. His tea used Japanese materials. It preferred the simple over the ornate. It asked the practitioner to find beauty not in the rare and expensive, but in the plain, the worn, the imperfect. The slightly crooked bowl, the bamboo vase, the earthen wall. This approach had roots that stretched back further still to an earlier teacher named Murata Shuko, who had first carried this spirit into tea practice a generation before. But Ju gave it a sharper form. There's a story about Ju that Rikyu carried with him his whole life. One autumn day, Ju asked a young student to clean the garden before a tea gathering. The student swept carefully, raked the leaves, cleared every stone path until the garden was immaculate. Then he stood back, looked at what he had done, and decided it was not quite right. He reached up to a branch overhead and shook it, gently, so that a few leaves drifted down and settled here and there across the clean ground. Ju came out, looked at the garden, and smiled. This was the lesson. Not the immaculate garden, which was merely clean. The garden with the few fallen leaves, which was alive. The difference between a space that has been controlled into lifelessness and a space that has been tended with enough love to know when to stop. Rikyu understood this immediately. In the way you understand things that named something you already knew but had never found words for. He would spend the rest of his life practicing it. And Yoshiro, who would one day be known as Sen no Rikyu, gave this vision its fullest expression, one that would last 400 years and reach the entire world. The word for what Rikyu is reaching toward is wabi. Wabi does not translate cleanly. The closest English words, simplicity, rusticity, imperfection, do not quite hold it. Wabi is not simplicity for its own sake. It is the recognition that something essential, something deeply alive, can be found precisely in what is plain and incomplete, and quietly present, not in what is perfect and expensive and demanding to be admired. Wabi is the beauty of the bowl that does not try to be beautiful, the room that does not try to impress, the host who has thought of nothing in the hours of preparation, except the comfort of this one guest, in this one unrepeatable moment. For Rikyu, this was not a style. It was a conviction about what life was for. He practiced. He studied at Daitokuji, the great Zen temple complex in Kyoto, and the training he received there, the discipline of sitting, the practice of doing ordinary things with complete attention, fed directly into what his tea would become. Not a ceremony performed for an audience, a space of genuine encounter between two human beings, stripped of rank and performance and pretense, held together by the warmth of a single bowl of tea. There is a story about a student who came to Rikyu confident that he had mastered the ceremony. He had practiced the correct way to fold the cloth, the correct way to handle the ladle, the correct order of movements for each phase of the gathering. He asked Rikyu if there was anything more to learn. Rikyu answered simply, "Pour the water carefully, fan the charcoal so the water boils well. Arrange the flowers as they live in the field. In summer, find ways to suggest coolness. In winter, warmth. Prepare everything ahead of time. And give whoever is in the room with you your complete and sincere attention." The student looked at him. "I already know all of that," he said. Rikyu smiled. "When you can truly do all of that," he said, "I will become your student." This story has been passed down through the tea tradition in various forms, and its source cannot be verified precisely. But it is entirely consistent with everything that Rikyu is recorded as having said and done. The ceremony, in his understanding, was not a performance to be mastered. It was a practice of sincerity that could not be finished. You could always pour more carefully. You could always give more, completely. He designed his tea rooms around this conviction. His most celebrated room, the Tai-an, still stands today at a temple called Myoki-an in Yamazaki near Kyoto, and it is designated a national treasure of Japan. It is 2 tatami mats, about 3.5 square meters, smaller than most modern bathrooms. Let me take you there, because the experience of entering a Rikyu tea room is not something that can be fully understood from a description. It begins before you reach the room itself. You arrive at a garden path. The roji, it is called, the dewy ground. It is a path of stepping stones through a small garden, and it is designed with a single purpose: to slow you down, to separate you gradually and deliberately from the world you came from. As you walk it, the noise of the day recedes. Your pace, without any effort on your part, adjusts to the stones beneath your feet. By the time the path brings you to the tea room, something in you has already shifted. You are not entirely the person who arrived. Then the entrance, the nijiriguchi, the crawl-through doorway, barely 2 feet square. To enter you must kneel. You must bow your head and pass through on your hands and knees. There is no other way. Whatever you were outside, you become smaller here. A great lord, a celebrated warrior, a man of rank and certainty, enters this room in the same posture as every other person who has ever entered it. Bent, humble, small. And on the other side you straighten, and you are in the room. What you find is not what you expected if you expected grandeur. 2 mats, earthen walls, a low ceiling that is aware of you, that holds you, rather than opening away into distance. Light entering through paper screens in a way that is never bright enough to be harsh. The smell of old plaster and tatami, and faintly, the charcoal burning beneath the iron kettle. The sound of the water beginning to heat. A soft, continuous murmur that the tea masters have always described as the sound of wind in distant pine trees. Nothing to look at, nothing to want, nothing to perform. Only the host, kneeling at the hearth, preparing your tea with the complete attention of someone for whom, in this moment, you are the only person in the world. Rikyu gave this experience a shape with 4 words: wa, kei, sei, jaku. Harmony, respect, purity, tranquility. 4 words that sound simple and require a lifetime. The crawl-through doorway was respect made physical, not the respect of words or titles, but the respect of a body that has bowed, that has made itself small to enter. Whatever you were outside, you arrived in this room having done the same thing every other person had done to enter it. The warrior, the merchant, the lord, all of them on their knees in the same dirt, passing through the same small door. Rank did not dissolve. It simply had to wait outside. Harmony was what the room itself held, when the host had done the work of preparation with genuine attention rather than performance. The season present in the flower in the alcove. The sound of the water matching the silence. Nothing competing with anything else. Not a mood that was manufactured, but a condition that arose when everything unnecessary had been removed. Purity was the quality of the host's intention. The hours before a gathering, wiping every surface, placing every object, were not about cleanliness. They were a form of concentration. By the time the guest arrived, there was nothing in the room and nothing in the host that was not entirely for the guest. And tranquility was what resulted. Not the absence of feeling, but the presence of something steadier than feeling, the ground beneath the feeling. A person who has been completely received by another person, in a room that was prepared entirely for them, tends to go quiet in a particular way. Not the quiet of having nothing to say. The quiet of having For a moment, nowhere else to need to be. This was the gift Rikyu spent his life learning to give. And it was precisely this quality of complete and unhurried presence that Hideyoshi wanted and could not quite possess, and that drew him, like everything rare and irreplaceable, to keep Rikyu as close as possible. Part of what Hideyoshi could never quite possess lived in the bowls themselves. In the city of Kyoto, there was a craftsman who made roof tiles. His name was Chojiro, and he worked with clay the way all tile makers do, shaping it, firing it, producing the functional and the plain. Rikyu found his work and recognized in the quality of his touch something worth pursuing. He asked Chojiro to make tea bowls, not on a potter's wheel, which produces the smooth symmetry of a perfect circle, but by hand, shaped directly by the fingers, allowed to keep whatever irregularity the hand naturally gives. The bowls that resulted were unlike anything in the established tea culture of the time. Glazed in a single color, black or red, without decoration, slightly uneven, slightly asymmetrical, bearing the marks of the fingers that had shaped them. Held in the hands, they had a quality of warmth that the flawless Chinese imports lacked, the warmth of something made by a person, for a person, without pretense of perfection. These became known as rakuwa. The name came later, derived from the name of one of Hideyoshi's palaces, and carries the meaning of ease, of contentment, of the simple pleasure of what is. The Raku family has been making these bowls in Kyoto ever since, in an unbroken line across more than 400 years and 16 generations. The same family, the same city, the same method, the same quiet conviction that a plain bowl shaped by hand holds something no technical perfection can produce. When you hold a raku bowl, you are holding the shape of a hand that is no longer there. The slight asymmetry, the unevenness of the glaze, the specific weight in your palm. These are not flaws. They are the evidence of a human encounter. Someone made this. For someone. And that is what it holds. Rikyu taught a related idea with a phrase that became, after his death, one of the most resonant in the whole of Japanese cultural life. Ichi-go, ichi-e. One time, one meeting. Every gathering happens once and only once. Even if the same people meet again tomorrow in the same room with the same utensils, it will be different. The light will have changed. The silence between them will have shifted. One of them will have lived another day, and that day will be in the room. This meeting, the one happening right now, will never happen again. The appropriate response to this is not sadness. It is the opposite of sadness. It is an intensity of presence so complete that nothing of the moment is wasted. If you are here, be here. The tea in your hands is the only tea. The person across from you is the only person. This moment is the only moment there is. Nobunaga was, in the most uncompromising sense, a force. Born in 1534, in a minor lord's household in Owari province, he had come further and faster than almost anyone of his generation. He moved his armies with a speed that his enemies found disorienting. He adopted Portuguese firearms earlier and more systematically than anyone else. He broke the military power of Buddhist monasteries that had accumulated too much armed influence. He began, methodically, to bring the warring provinces under a single hand, and he understood, more clearly than any warlord before him, that tea was a tool of politics. Famous tea utensils in Nobunaga's hands became currency. A celebrated tea caddy given by a warlord to his general carried more prestige than gold. A tea gathering hosted by Nobunaga was a statement of authority. And to organize those gatherings, to curate the objects and manage the delicate social atmosphere of a room where rivals shared a single bowl, for that, Nobunaga needed the best. He found Rikyu in Sakai. By around 1575, Rikyu had entered his service, and then, in the summer of 1582, on a night in Kyoto at a temple called Honno-ji, one of Nobunaga's own generals turned against him. The temple was surrounded before dawn. Nobunaga, facing the impossible, set fire to the building and died in the flames. He was 47 years old. The man who moved fastest to fill the void was not the most senior of Nobunaga's generals. He was the one who had always been the most capable, Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Let us understand who Hideyoshi was, because his story is the other half of everything that follows. He was born in 1537 in a village in Ware province, to a peasant family of no distinction. His father was a foot soldier who died while Hideyoshi was still a child. The family had nothing, no land, no name, no standing, no path toward power in a society where power was inherited from birth. In the logic of 16th-century Japan, a child of this background simply did not become the ruler of the nation. It was not merely unlikely, it was by every rule of the world he was born into, impossible. And yet, he found his way into Nobunaga's service as a young man, beginning by some accounts, in the most humble role imaginable, carrying Nobunaga's sandals, a task so far beneath the notice of anyone with social standing that it was considered no task at all. But Hideyoshi had qualities that social standing could not manufacture. An intelligence that was quick and practical, a gift for reading people that was almost uncanny, an energy that refused to recognize the limits that the social order tried to impose on him, and a capacity for work that outlasted everyone around him. He rose, battle by battle, decision by decision, year by year, he rose. When Nobunaga died at Honno-ji, Hideyoshi avenged him within days, defeating the general who had turned on their lord. And then, with the same speed and the same clear sight, he moved to position himself as Nobunaga's successor. Within years, he had accomplished what Nobunaga had died attempting. He unified Japan. The man who had been born with nothing became, by the mid-1580s, the effective ruler of the entire nation. He took the title of Kampaku, Imperial Regent. He was the most powerful person in Japan. And he inherited Nobunaga's tea masters, including Sen no Rikyu. The relationship that developed between these two men was unlike anything that had existed before in Japanese political or cultural life. Hideyoshi needed Rikyu in ways that went far beyond the practical. He needed him to organize the tea ceremonies that were central to his political life, yes. He needed him to advise on famous tea implements, to manage the social delicacies of a gathering where powerful and suspicious men sat close together, but he needed him in a deeper way as well. Hideyoshi, who had risen from a peasant background to the summit of a society that measured human worth by birth, was acutely aware of what he lacked. He was not educated in the classical manner. He was not handsome. Historical accounts describe him as notably plain-featured, with a narrow face that earned him the nickname Saru, the monkey, from Nobunaga himself, in a gesture that was probably affectionate and was certainly blunt. He was shrewd and energetic and capable of genuine warmth. But refinement, the deep, settled quality that comes from being raised inside a cultured tradition, was something he had to reach for rather than something he carried naturally. Rikyu had that quality. Not the refinement of inherited privilege, not the elegance of court aristocracy, but something harder and more authentic. The refinement of a man who had spent decades looking clearly at the world, stripping away everything unnecessary, and finding in what remained a beauty that was not decorative, but essential. Hideyoshi understood instinctively that this was rare. He wanted to be near it. He may have hoped that it would somehow become his. And Rikyu, for his part, had his own reasons for entering the circle of the most powerful man in Japan. The vision of tea he had spent a lifetime developing was not merely personal. It was a philosophy he believed could change how people lived, how they encountered one another, what they valued. To have that philosophy embodied at the highest levels of Japanese culture and political life, to have the ruler of Japan drinking tea from a plain clay bowl in a room barely large enough for two, where warrior and merchant met as equals, was not a small thing. It was a way of putting his deepest convictions into the world at the most consequential possible scale. In 1585, Hideyoshi prepared a tea ceremony at the imperial palace for the emperor. To enter the palace, Rikyu required formal credentials, and so the emperor granted him a Buddhist title, Rikyu Koji. It was an extraordinary moment, a merchant's son from a port city, acknowledged by the imperial court as the foremost cultural figure of his age. He was 63 years old. The boy from Sakai had become, officially and undeniably, the greatest tea master Japan had ever seen. The merchant's son, the peasant's son, at the center of everything. But in that center, something was already beginning to strain. Because the world Hideyoshi was building, and the world Rikyu had spent his life trying to protect were not, at the deepest level, the same world. Hideyoshi built large. He built Osaka Castle, grand enough to announce its builder's ambition to the entire country. He built the Jurakudai, a palace in Kyoto of staggering scale and ornamentation. When Rikyu had helped him create what became known as the Golden Tea Room, a portable structure with every surface covered in gold leaf, transported wherever Hideyoshi traveled, Rikyu served tea in it at the imperial palace. He could do this. He understood that beauty took many forms and that different occasions called for different expressions. But two rooms could not have been more different. The Tai-an, two mats, mud walls, a ceiling low enough to require a slight bow of the head, a crawl-through doorway. The Golden Tea Room. Dazzling, overwhelming, unmistakable, demanding to be admired. One room asked you to be present, the other asked you to be impressed. Hideyoshi wanted grandeur because grandeur announced that the peasant's son had arrived, completely and beyond dispute. Rikyu wanted simplicity because simplicity was where he had always found the truest things. These two visions had lived together productively for years. The tension between them was, for a long time, what made the relationship creative. But tension, if it is not resolved, does not disappear. It accumulates. What came before the tension is worth understanding, because it was real. Rikyu and Hideyoshi, in the years of their closest collaboration, had something that went beyond politics. One record from the time, preserved in the Otomo family archives, quotes Hideyoshi's own brother describing Rikyu as the one who handled secret affairs, while official matters were managed by others. A tea master from a merchant's household, trusted by the most powerful man in Japan, with things he trusted to no one else. They made decisions together in small rooms. They sat in the quiet together, which is an intimate thing, as intimate as most conversations. And Hideyoshi, who had never had a peer, who had risen so far above everyone he had known in his youth and so far beyond what any precedent had suggested was possible, found in that small room something he could not find in his court or his palaces, a person who was not afraid of him. Rikyu was not afraid of Hideyoshi, not because he was reckless, but because his ground was different. Hideyoshi stood on the ground of power, which is always shifting, always requiring defense. Rikyu stood on something quieter and harder to name, the ground of a person who knows exactly what they believe and has organized their entire life around it. From that ground, the most powerful man in Japan was, in the tea room, simply a guest. The peasant's son and the merchant's son, both of them men who had risen beyond what their beginnings suggested was possible. Both of them, for a time, in the same small room, sharing the warmth of a bowl of tea, in the quiet of the morning, before the world had quite begun. Imagine that first morning. Hideyoshi had conquered armies, outmaneuvered lords, built a political structure that stretched across the entire country. He entered Rikyu's tea room and bent his head to pass through the small door, the same door every other person had to bend to enter. And for a moment he was not the Kampaku, not the ruler of Japan, not the peasant's son who had become more powerful than anyone born to power. He was a person, in a room, about to be given tea. Rikyu prepared it without haste. The movements he had practiced for decades, the folding of the cloth, the angle of the ladle, the particular sound the water made as it was poured. He was not performing. He was simply doing what he had always done, with the same completeness he had brought to every bowl since the first one, in the same room that could have held a farmer or an emperor and would have treated them the same. Hideyoshi received the bowl, held it, drank. What he felt in that moment, no record preserves. But he came back, again and again, across years. He came back to that small room, to that unhurried quiet, to the person who would not be impressed by him and would not be afraid of him, and would give him, in a plain clay bowl, something that all his power could not manufacture. Whatever it was that Hideyoshi was looking for in the tea room, he believed Rikyu had it. And he was right. Let us stay here for a moment, in the quiet that runs between these two men. You can feel it, perhaps, in your own life. The pull between what the world asks you to demonstrate and what you know, in the quietest part of yourself, to actually be true. Rikyu lived inside that pull for decades, and what he found, in the center of it, was the bowl of tea, the one thing that could hold both without losing either. The tea did not perform. It did not argue. It simply was, warm and complete, in the hands of whoever received it. That warmth is here now, in the space between the words. The quiet has gathered around you. And the story continues. There is a story about a wild chrysanthemum. At a tea gathering, Hideyoshi placed a small flower between the tea bowl and the tea canister. A casual gesture, the kind a man makes when he believes he understands something. It was a test, perhaps, or simply a display. Look, the gesture said. I know Wabi too. I understand what you have been teaching me. Rikyu looked at the chrysanthemum. He looked at the bowl. Something passed through him in that moment. A recognition, clear and quiet. The way you recognize a wrong note in a piece of music you love. Not anger. Not contempt. Simply the knowledge that the flower did not belong there, and that leaving it would be a lie. He removed it, quietly, without comment. without any change in expression. He set it aside and continued preparing the tea as if nothing had happened. The ceremony proceeded in silence. The tea was served. The guests drank. Hideyoshi said nothing, but those who were present noted something in his expression. Not anger, not exactly. Something closer to the feeling of reaching for a door handle and finding the door is not there. The greatest tea master in Japan had, without a word, without a gesture of defiance, simply looked at what Hideyoshi had done and put it aside. As if the ruler of Japan had shown his drawing to a master painter, and the master had gently, without comment, corrected it. What Rikyu felt afterward, no one recorded. But we know enough about who he was to imagine it. Not triumph, not satisfaction. More likely a kind of sadness. The sadness of someone who sees clearly that two people who have meant a great deal to one another are moving, slowly and irreversibly, toward a place where they can no longer be in the same room. This moment, small as it was, tells you everything about what would eventually destroy them. Hideyoshi had conquered armies. He had conquered lords and provinces and the entire political geography of Japan. He had conquered the gap between peasant and regent through nothing but the force of his own exceptional nature. The one thing he could not conquer was the judgment of SEN no Rikyu, and as the years passed, and his power grew more absolute, and his court grew more elaborate, that unconquerable thing became quietly unbearable. But we are not there yet. Let us go back to the beginning of these two men together when the partnership was still extraordinary and the tension was still generative. Hideyoshi understood tea as Nobunaga had taught him to understand it, as power, as legitimacy, as the most sophisticated language in which a ruler could speak to other rulers and to the court. He collected famous tea implements with a hunger that his contemporaries found almost athletic. Tea caddies and tea bowls that had passed through the hands of legendary figures were worth, in his estimation, as much as provinces. He gave them as rewards to generals who had distinguished themselves in battle, and the generals understood exactly what they meant. You are in the inner circle. You are trusted. You are seen. What Nobunaga had used as a tool, Hideyoshi made into an obsession, and his obsession had a specific shape. But to understand the shape, you need to understand the wound underneath it. Hideyoshi had risen from nothing, and in doing so, he had acquired almost everything. He had land, armies, castles, titles, the loyalty of lords and generals who would have dismissed him as beneath their notice 20 years before. He had conquered the country. But there was one thing he had not been able to conquer, and it was the thing that mattered most in the world he now inhabited, the assumption, built into the bones of Japanese aristocratic culture, that what you were born into was what you were. He could not be granted the title of shogun, the traditional designation of Japan's military ruler, because the title was understood to require noble lineage. He settled for other titles, Kanpaku, imperial regent, and later, taiko. He built the grandest palace in Kyoto and filled it with the most celebrated objects in the country. He dressed in silks that no peasant had ever worn and hosted ceremonies that no peasant had ever imagined. But he could not, by any of this, change what the oldest families knew about where he had come from. Culture for Hideyoshi was the answer. If birth could not be manufactured, refinement could be performed. If lineage could not be acquired, magnificence could be constructed. And at the center of this strategy was tea, which had become under Nobunaga, and then under Hideyoshi himself, the prestige language of Japanese elite life. To be recognized as the master of tea culture, to have the greatest tea master in Japan at your side, to host the largest tea gathering in history, was to claim a legitimacy that military victory alone could never quite secure. This is why he needed Rikyu in a way that went beyond the practical. Rikyu's presence was not decoration. It was authentication. A man of Rikyu's integrity, whose aesthetic judgment was universally recognized as incorruptible, could not be hired to approve of something he did not approve of. That was exactly what made his approval worth having. And when the greatest tea master in Japan served tea to the emperor in your golden room, you were not merely demonstrating wealth. You were demonstrating that your claim to stand at the center of Japanese cultural life had been validated by the one man whose validation could not be bought. And the golden room itself was the shape of Hideyoshi's obsession made physical. Rikyu had designed it with him, or at minimum had participated in its creation and served tea within it. A portable room with every surface covered in gold leaf, transported wherever Hideyoshi traveled, unfolded in the presence of the most powerful guests to announce without any possibility of ambiguity that its owner stood at the summit of everything. At the imperial palace in 1585, when Hideyoshi served tea to the emperor himself, the room was there, dazzling, overwhelming, the splendor of an entire nation compressed into a single gold-leafed space. And Rikyu served the tea. With the same unhurried movements, the same complete attention that he brought to every bowl he had ever made in the smallest, darkest, most austere room he had ever built. This is what made him irreplaceable, and it is also what made him ultimately impossible for Hideyoshi to keep. A man who could serve tea in a golden room with the same spirit he brought to a two-mat hut was not someone who believed in gold rooms. He was someone who believed in something that gold could not affect. And a ruler whose whole claim to cultural legitimacy rested on his gold room knew, at some level, what that meant. But first, the greatest tea gathering in the history of Japan. In the 10th month of 1587, Hideyoshi posted notices across Kyoto and beyond. He was holding a tea gathering at Kitano Tenmangu, the great shrine in the city's northwest. And it would be open to everyone. Not only the lords, not only the wealthy, not only those who possessed rare tea implements. Farmers, townspeople, merchants, anyone who wished to attend could come, bringing whatever they had, a simple bowl, a mat to sit on. Those who had no tea could bring roasted barley instead. The barrier of wealth that normally governed the refined world of tea was for this one occasion lifted. On the appointed day, around 1,000 people came. The grounds of the shrine became a vast open-air gathering, hundreds of small tea stations spread across the grounds and into the surrounding pine groves. Lords with celebrated collections set up beside townspeople, with nothing but a cloth and a borrowed bowl. The hierarchy that structured every moment of everyday life in Hideyoshi's Japan dissolved for a single autumn day into the shared act of making and drinking tea together. At the center of it stood Hideyoshi with his golden room, and beside him, serving tea to the most eminent guests, stood Sen no Rikyu. It lasted one day. The gathering had been planned for 10, but it ended after the first. The reasons are not entirely clear, though some accounts point to political concerns elsewhere that demanded Hideyoshi's attention. But on that one day, something genuinely rare had happened. the art form that Rikyu had spent his life refining, that he had always insisted belonged equally to the powerful and the plain, had been given, for a few hours, to an entire city. Anyone who wanted to drink tea that day could drink it. Anyone who wanted to enter the world of the ceremony, even for a morning, even with a borrowed bowl and roasted barley in place of tea, was welcome. This was the closest thing Hideyoshi's Japan ever produced to the vision that Rikyu had always carried. The tea room as a place where rank dissolved, where every person was simply a person, worthy of the host's complete attention. It would be the last time the two of them stood together at such a height. After Kitano, the relationship began, slowly and then faster, to change. There is a story about a morning glory that belongs to these years, the years after Kitano, when the distance between the two men was growing without either of them quite naming it. Word spread through Hideyoshi's court that Rikyu had planted morning glories in the garden of his tea room, and that they were blooming in extraordinary abundance. Hundreds of flowers, people said. A sight unlike anything in the city. Hideyoshi decided he wanted to see them. He sent word that he would come one morning to Rikyu's tea room. On the appointed morning he arrived. The garden was bare. Every morning glory had been cut. Not a single stem remained, not a leaf. The garden that had been described to him as a marvel of abundance was empty, the earth clean and undisturbed, as if the flowers had never existed at all. Hideyoshi looked at the garden and felt what a person feels when something they had been anticipating is simply not there. His mood darkened. He had come for something specific, and it had been taken from him. He entered the tea room. In the tokonoma alcove, in a simple bamboo vase, stood one morning glory, a single bloom, selected from among all the hundreds that had filled the garden as the one flower that was most completely itself that morning, arranged so that the light fell on it precisely. And in that arrangement, it was not merely a flower, but the concentrated essence of what a morning glory was. Hideyoshi stood in front of it and understood. He understood, and in understanding it, he felt something that powerful men rarely feel and almost never acknowledge, that he was in the presence of a vision more complete than his own, that the garden full of flowers had been his instinct, and the single flower was Rikyu's answer to it, and there was no contest between them. The lesson was not spoken. It never needed to be. In abundance, nothing is visible. To truly give something to another person, you must first choose. The choice costs something, and what remains after the cost has been paid is the only thing that was ever real. Hideyoshi in these years was becoming a different man. The unification was complete. There were no more campaigns to plan on Japanese soil, no more lords to outmaneuver, no more mountains left to climb within his own country. And absolute power, which had been the engine of his extraordinary rise, was now beginning to work on his character in the way it works on everyone who holds it too long without resistance. He grew more volatile, more suspicious, more prone to decisions that were harsh and sudden and difficult to predict. Those around him learned to watch for the shifts in his mood, with the careful attention of people who understood that their lives depended on reading them correctly. Rikyu watched too, but Rikyu did not adjust. This was the thing about him that no amount of power could change. He had been adjusting his vision to accommodate Hideyoshi's tastes for years, designing the golden room, organizing the grand ceremonies, serving tea in settings that bore no resemblance to the simple dark rooms he preferred. He had done all of this without surrendering what he actually believed. But adjusting his behavior was one thing. Adjusting his judgment was another. And Hideyoshi, as the years passed and his authority became more total, wanted more than Rikyu's compliance. He wanted his agreement. He wanted Rikyu to look at the chrysanthemum placed between the bowl and the canister and leave it there. Rikyu moved it. The story of the black Raku bowl is another window into this. At the New Year's tea ceremony in 1591, Rikyu used a black bowl made by Chojiro, the same tilemaker turned potter whose collaboration with Rikyu had produced the Raku tradition. Rikyu believed this bowl was perfect for the occasion. The deep black of the glaze made the vivid green of the matcha glow, with an intensity that a lighter bowl could not produce. It was a beautiful choice, and entirely in keeping with everything he had always taught. Hideyoshi disliked it. Not because the bowl was not beautiful, perhaps in some parts of himself that he could not entirely acknowledge, because it was. Because Rikyu's judgment always was better than his own, and the golden room, and the chrysanthemum, and the disliked black bowl were all symptoms of the same wound, that the most powerful man in Japan had found the one domain in which he would never be the best, and the man who was the best in it would not pretend otherwise. There were practical reasons, too. Rikyu's influence had grown to a scale that made him, by any measure, one of the most powerful figures in the country. Lords sought his approval of their tea implements because his word could raise the value of an object from ordinary to priceless. He had political access that his enemies at court resented. His disciples included some of the most powerful men in Japan, among them the great warrior aesthete Furuta Oribe, and others who would carry the way of tea forward into the generations that followed. The signs of danger had been present for a year before the end. In 1590, Hideyoshi had ordered the execution of Yamanue Soji, who had been Rikyu's most celebrated disciple, one of the sharpest and most outspoken practitioners of wabi-cha in the country. Soji had made remarks that angered Hideyoshi, and the punishment was severe. Rikyu witnessed this. He understood what it meant about the direction Hideyoshi was moving, and about how thin the protection that had surrounded him had become. When Hideyoshi's beloved younger brother Hidenaga, who had been Rikyu's closest ally within the Toyotomi court, died in 1591, Rikyu lost his most important protector. The enemies who had long wanted him gone now had less to stop them. And then there was the statue. At Daitokuji, the great Zen temple complex in Kyoto, where Rikyu had trained and where his connections ran deep, Rikyu had contributed to the reconstruction of one of the temple's great gates. In gratitude, a wooden statue of him was placed in the upper story of this gate. The problem, as it was reported to Hideyoshi, was the location. Important people, including Hideyoshi himself and potentially the emperor, would pass beneath this gate, and pass beneath it was to pass beneath the statue of Rikyu, to walk in effect beneath the feet of a merchant's son who had become the most influential figure in Japanese cultural life. The accounts of how Hideyoshi responded vary, but the outcome does not. In the second month of 1591, Hideyoshi ordered Sen no Rikyu to commit seppuku. Was it the statue? The accumulated resentment of years of judgments that Rikyu would not soften? The enemies who had whispered in the ruler's ear? Hidenaga's death, which removed the last voice that might have interceded? All of these? Historians have debated this for more than 4 centuries and arrived at no certain answer. What seems clear is that the specific cause, whatever it was, had fallen into conditions that had been building for a long time. The fundamental fact was simple. Hideyoshi needed Rikyu to be controllable, and Rikyu, by his very nature, was not. The thing that had made him precious was the thing that made him, in the end, intolerable. It is said that there was a way out, that Hideyoshi intended to spare him if he bowed his head and asked forgiveness, that several of Rikyu's most powerful disciples, men who commanded armies, tried to intercede on his behalf. The order, they argued, was too severe. The offense, whatever it was, did not warrant this. They asked Hideyoshi to reconsider. Hideyoshi's position was reported to be, "Let Rikyu apologize, and it will be done." The message reached Rikyu. The door was open. All he had to do was walk through it. He looked at the door. He understood what walking through it would require. Not the physical act of bowing, not the words themselves, but the thing the words would mean. That he had, in the end, placed his own survival above the integrity that had been the center of every bowl of tea he had ever made. That the man who had spent a lifetime refusing to perform what he did not feel would, when it finally cost him something real, perform it after all. He could not. Not because he was stubborn, not because he wanted to die, but because the thing being asked of him was not a small thing. It was the only thing. And Rikyu, who had built his entire life on the conviction that sincerity was the only foundation on which anything real could stand, understood that a life saved by abandoning that foundation was not the life he had been living. It was something else entirely, wearing the same face. He prepared instead for what was coming. Let the quiet settle here for a moment. Not the quiet of sadness, but the quiet of someone who has decided, completely, who they are. Because what comes next is not tragedy, though it contains tragedy. What comes next is the thing that has kept Rikyu's name alive for 4 centuries. The thing that makes his story not merely a story of a great man brought down by a jealous ruler, but a story about what it means to hold on to something so completely that even death cannot take it from you. The night is deep. You are still. And the story moves toward morning. On the last morning of his life, Sen no Rikyu made tea. He rose before dawn. He prepared the room. He set the charcoal, arranged the water, placed the implements in their correct positions, with the same care he had brought to every gathering he had ever hosted in his 70 years. His family and his closest disciples came. They sat together in the small room in the hour before the light arrived, and he served them tea. What was he feeling in those hours? No one who was there left a complete account, but we know what he believed. And we can trust that a man who had spent his whole life practicing the art of being fully present did not spend his last morning anywhere other than here, in this room, with these people, in this hour. Not in the court that had ordered his death, not in the years of collaboration that had ended so badly. Here, the water heating, the hands moving in their familiar sequence, the faces of the people he had loved, receiving what he had to give. This is the image I want you to hold tonight. Not the political story, not the rivalry, not the orders from above. This. A man who knew he was going to die, choosing, with his last free morning, to make tea. To do the one thing he had spent his entire life learning to do completely, one final time, for the people he loved. He served each guest in turn. When the tea was finished, he presented each piece of the equipment for their inspection: the kettle, the ladle, the tea container, the whisk, and gave each object to one of the guests present as a keepsake. Something to remember the morning by, something to hold after he was gone. One object he kept back: the bowl. He held it in his hands for a moment. The bowl that had held the last tea he would ever make, that had touched the lips of the people he had spent his life serving. He looked at it, and then quietly, he broke it. Shattered it completely, so that it could never be used again. He said, as he did, "Never again shall this cup, polluted by the lips of misfortune, be used by man." Some things belong only to their moment. Some things are so completely of one time, one gathering, one encounter between particular people in a particular light, that to let them continue into the next day would be to diminish what they were. Rikyu had spent his whole life teaching this. One time, one meeting. And now, at the end of his life, he lived it one final, definitive time. The guests departed, one remained as witness. Rikyu composed his death poem. It speaks of 70 years of life, of strength spent to the very end, of a spiritual sword, the blade of insight that cuts through everything, even the most revered, even the Buddha himself. And in its final movement, it casts that sword upward freely into the sky. It is not a poem of bitterness, it is not a poem of regret. It is a poem of release, of someone who has held something completely for a very long time, and is now, with a full heart and an open hand, letting it go. He died that morning in the second month of 1591 at his residence within Hideyoshi's Jurakudai Palace in Kyoto. He was 69 years old. What happened to Hideyoshi afterward? He is said to have regretted it. The accounts are uncertain, but they are consistent, and they carry the feeling of something true. That the man, who had ordered the death of his closest cultural confidant, lived afterward with the knowledge that he had destroyed something irreplaceable. You can command a person to die. You cannot command back what they took with them. Hideyoshi died 7 years later in 1598. His Toyotomi dynasty did not endure. Within a generation, power had passed to other hands, and the empire he had built with such ferocious energy did not outlast his own century. The castles changed hands. The golden room was eventually lost. No one knows precisely how or when, and survives today only in reconstructions. The way of tea survived, not as a reconstruction, as a living thing. Rikyu's grandson Sotan carried the tradition forward, and through Sotan's own sons, the teaching was divided into 3 lineages that exist to this day: Omote Senke, Ura Senke, and Mushano-koji Senke, the 3 SEN family schools, each named for the location of its founding house in Kyoto. Between them, they have transmitted what Rikyu taught, hand to hand, teacher to student, generation to generation, for more than 400 years. They hold memorial services for him every month, not because they're required to, because the teaching is still alive, and the person who gave it to them still matters. In tea rooms across Japan tonight, and in other countries as well, in rooms that have been built to his proportions, with his materials, in his spirit, people are practicing what Rikyu practiced. The precise way to fold the cloth, the correct angle of the ladle, the unhurried sequence of movements that makes a bowl of tea not just a beverage, but an act of complete attention, given freely to another person. Each of these students is connected through an unbroken chain of teachers to the morning Rikyu spent his life preparing for and then met completely without flinching. And on the 28th of every month, the 3 SEN family schools gather at a small sub-temple within the Daitokuji compound in Kyoto, where Rikyu is buried, and hold a memorial service for him. Every month, not once a year, every month without exception, for more than 400 years. The family he founded still gathers at his grave on the same day of every month, the day he died, to remember him and to practice what he taught. There is no institution in the world quite like it, a teaching received so completely that it is still being honored in the same place, by the same lineage, on the same day of every month, 4 centuries after the man who gave it chose death rather than abandon it. The word Wabi-sabi, which Rikyu lived before it had a name, has traveled. It is spoken now in English, in French, in German, in dozens of languages, by people who have never knelt in a Japanese tea room, but who recognize when they hear it something they already knew. The plain thing that holds more than the decorated one. The room that gains power from what is absent. The imperfect object that feels more alive than the flawless one. The moment that is enough, exactly as it is, without anything added. This recognition did not arrive in the world by accident. It came from Japan. It came from a tradition that Rikyu shaped over a lifetime and then protected with his death. And when a designer in Scandinavia clears a table to let one object breathe, or someone in a city apartment chooses one worn bowl over a set of new ones, or a person lies awake at night and feels, in the quiet, that the reaching and the striving can perhaps wait until morning, they are touching, without knowing it, something that has been traveling from that small dark room in Kyoto for 400 years. You may be one of those people. The fact that you are here tonight in the quiet, choosing to listen to a story about a man who spent his life taking things away rather than adding them, suggests that something in you already understands what he was reaching for. The stillness you are feeling right now, the settling of the body, the slowing of the mind, the sense that this moment is complete without anything more being required of it. This is what Rikyu built his life around. This is what he gave, bowl by bowl, gathering by gathering, to every person who came through the small doorway and sat in the low-ceilinged room and received the tea he had prepared for them. He was preparing it for you, too, in a way. Across 400 years, and whatever distance separates you from a small room in 16th-century Japan, he was preparing it for anyone who would ever feel, at the end of a long day, that what they most needed was not more, but less. Not louder, but quieter. Not fuller, but emptier. In the way that a room emptied of everything unnecessary is not empty at all, but full of what matters. Let us end tonight in that room. The charcoal is burned low. The water in the iron kettle makes its sound. The sound the tea masters have always described as wind, moving through distant pine trees, soft and continuous, neither loud nor fully quiet, the sound of something alive and unhurried. The walls are the color of old earth. The light that comes through the paper screen is the light of the hour before dawn, when the darkness has softened, but the day has not yet begun. The room is very small, 2 mats, the ceiling low enough that you're aware of it, that it holds you rather than opening away into distance. The smell of tatami and charcoal and the faint, clean scent of the tea that was served here, not long ago, to someone who needed it. This is where Rikyu spent his life. Not in the palaces, Not beside the golden room. Here, in this smallness, this carefully tended quiet, this space that asked nothing of you except that you be present. And you are present now. Whatever you carried into this night, the day's unfinished things, the decisions that wait, the small anxieties that accumulate like sediment at the bottom of a busy life, let them be where they are for now. They will be there in the morning. They will be manageable in the morning. Right now there is only this, the low ceiling, the fading warmth, the sound of the kettle like wind in the pines, your own breath slowing without you trying to slow it. Rikyu taught that the quality of complete presence, the kind that makes a single bowl of tea feel like a gift rather than a transaction, is available in every ordinary moment to every ordinary person. It does not require a ceremony. It does not require a tea room, or a special bowl, or any particular skill. It requires only that you stop adding for a little while and let yourself be in what is already here. What is already here is enough. The room is quiet. The kettle murmurs. Somewhere, a few pine needles catch the first suggestion of wind and release it again. The darkness holds you in the particular way that only deep nighttime darkness does, not threatening, not empty, but full. The way Rikyu's simple rooms were full, because nothing has been added to distract from what is essential. What is left is everything. Your body is heavy now in the good way, the way it gets when the day is finally finished and something in you that had been held tightly is allowed to open. Your breathing is slower than it was, each breath a little quieter, each exhale releasing a little more of what the day was. Sen no Rikyu spent 70 years preparing a bowl of tea for whoever needed it. He held his vision so completely that nothing, not the command of the most powerful man in Japan, could make him set it down. And what he was trying to give, in every ceremony he ever hosted, in every small room he ever built, in every plain bowl he ever lifted in his hands and offered to a guest, was exactly this: a moment of complete rest in what is already whole. You are already whole. The kettle sings quietly. The room holds you. The night is doing what nights do best, pulling everything slowly towards stillness, toward the dark water of sleep where the body repairs itself and the mind releases its grip and the morning is allowed to approach on its own. Let it come. There is nothing to prepare for, nothing to finish, nothing that will not wait. The pine trees catch the wind and let it go. The bowl rests empty on the mat. The room is very quiet and you are exactly where you need to be. Good night.